Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our weekly debrief of post-fight interviews with the team. Right here, we have Aren Hill and Brian Culver of Team Blip, and we'll walk you through our fight going against Overhaul and go from there. So, Brian, welcome to the the podcast, the interview. Do you
Thank
want to
you.
tell us a little bit about you and who you are?
Sure. I'm a senior mechanical engineer at Johnson & Johnson MedTech out in California. I've worked with Aren for a long time. We've been friends for a long time. So, we kind of jumped into this back in Texas, maybe 5 years ago. And thank goodness that robot did not make it off the ground. But we've been kind of working on BattleBots ever since. So, we've come a long way, I think.
That's every single robot's got Brian's fingerprints all over it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of fun. Totally. So, but we're here tonight to talk about Blip. So
we're here, yeah. Well, Blip, and everybody here. It's a good time. Just sitting here chat too. I've always enjoyed working with you here on the team, and so yeah. But let us go into a little bit about what we thought going into this, I guess. So we just coming out of the Rusty fight, right? We fought Rusty. What were we thinking?
Sure. I think we were pretty happy with the robot. It really didn't have that much box time, which was, very unusual compared to Tantrum, for example, right, where you're normally going to 3 minutes. And the other thing to understand is that we knew coming out of that Rusty fight that we were going to have our second fight, which was Overhaul, immediately later in the day. So we were actually already right in go mode, trying to get prepared for this Overhaul fight.
Yeah.
So Aren can talk a little bit more about that.
Dave and Rusty spent the first week of the event trying to get Rusty Jr., and he's posted about this, trying to get Rusty Jr. underweight and functional. And producers really wanted Blip's first fight to be Rusty. So Rusty, brand new robot that's testing at home, did some practice at home, was sitting there for a week as we were just tidying things up and getting ready to go, but it ended up pushing it out a full week. And that meant our first two fights ended up being the same day. So this Overhaul fight was later the same day from the Rusty fight.
Right, and this is after we had come out of fighting against both Malice and Lucky. And
so the Blip crew's like,
we're just hanging out. It was good. It was fun.
Right.
We were cheering you on. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, it was entertaining.
Yeah. But yeah, that tension level definitely builds after a week of waiting for your fight, right? Absolutely. Right. A lot later in the season, right? As the fights get closer and closer together for robots in general.
Yeah, there are some robots.
You don't even have time necessarily to think about it, right?
Yeah, and Bounty Hunters last year, there were a few people that ended up doing like 3, maybe 4 fights in a day, and it's like, okay.
But you really have opportunity over a week to really ruminate on that fight.
I do remember seeing you, Brian, in particular, getting very antsy, waiting for those first 2 fights.
Yeah.
So Overhaul, what did we think about that pick, Aren? Like, did you think anything in particular?
I do find it a little funny on the production side that the bite-sized robot goes with the bitey robot, as far as Blip, I think, would nicely fit in the claw of Overhaul. And we did joke ahead of time, going, we'd probably fire. Yeah, we'd fire if they actually clamped us.
Absolutely. I think we are both kind of relieved to not have to worry about, it's absolutely not that we weren't worried about losing, but worried about having the robot come out of the match destroyed. That's always kind of like the first thing you look at. You're like, okay, is this a match where the robot could be decimated, or, are we going to come out of it maybe in one piece? So that's always a nice relief.
We can come out embarrassed and have been thrown around the box the entire time, but the robot's still going to be in pretty good shape.
Right. So that feels good always. And so then it was just about what configuration do you want to run? What strategy do you want to run?
Yeah. Do you want to go into a little bit more about that too?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why do we pick forks, I guess,
Right.
One configuration that we have.
Forks. What's that?
The one configuration. Why did we choose forks?
Yes. We do have more than one configuration. We chose to run the forks because at this point in the event, that's the only thing that our opponents had seen out of us. And so we thought we could make good use of the forks against Overhaul. They do also have long forks, but we were comfortable kind of tying with them or being able to drive around them and eventually get under them, right? And we didn't want to show off kind of our fancier wedge deck that you guys will see later in the season. So that was kind of a explicit decision. Maybe a different wedge would be more competitive against Overhaul, but then later, you know, that would give us a disadvantage because our opponents might know what's coming for them when they see that wedge come out. So you only get to show off your new wedge once, right? Before everyone knows what it is.
Yep. And then definitely learning curve happening. There's the length of the match for the Rusty fight versus the length of this match was good to get more time driving around the box.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so with Overhaul in particular though, like, is there anything that you're trying to do strategy wise? Like, did you have anything other than match time that you really wanted to do with trying to beat them first of all, right? And then also just trying to like suss out any details within the Blip hardware.
Yeah, so a lot of it is there was a definitely learning curve of cadence going on. People noticed the wheelies, which are fun, but not fun because I'm used to driving Tantrum from last year, which handles amazing. And all of a sudden, if I turn to the right, the front of the robot's off the ground. So it's figure out where that is and what that cadence is was one thing. But then another part from the actual like match perspective was we had no idea the flipper would be able to take off the back two wheels of Overhaul. And so just from a damage perspective, it's like, okay, we were expecting they're very monster trucky, and that's a phrase Charles has used himself for just hard to pin down, very bouncy, hard to get stuck places. And in our instance, when it's like pin, get flywheel spun up, or we leave it spun up and get flips and that back and forth cadence, it was definitely a more difficult one from that perspective. So happily back wheels come off, so that helps.
Yeah, there's a nice balance there between having the flywheel at a high enough speed to do aggressive flipping and not gyroing, right? And we were able to, over the course of, I think this match, we had what we call an idle speed, which is the speed that the flywheel is operating at while we're just wanting to drive around, right? And ideally that idle speed is low enough that we're not gyroing. But what we found out in this match was that
so what happened?
too high.
So the idle speed is too high?
Right, so we were just gyring all over the place, right? And that was super apparent.
Right. But I thought that was also part of the issue with the switch. I thought that you were no longer in the idle speed.
Yes, we haven't even touched on that yet.
We haven't touched on that yet, right? But that, you know, does segue pretty nicely because, right, we're worried about gyroing, and so suddenly we're gyroing like mad. And why might that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So
panic.
Yeah. As the secondary driver, Bryan, what happened? Yeah.
After this first self-right, if you flip back one picture, one more picture. Yeah, so after this self-right, we get back up. And at this point, I had actually broken the switch off of the controller. So this is kind of an RC plane style switch. It's a toggle switch rather than a button. And, you know, maybe it was a little old, maybe it was a little fatigued.
It was brand new. I replaced it before.
Maybe I have really strong hands, who can say?
Look, I think it's all that rock climbing, you know, you just didn't know your own strength that you've been doing.
Yeah, that's gotta be it.
This photo is also later in the match when we flipped ourselves over in our self-rating.
Yeah, but needless to say, that thing got stuck in the on position. And so what that does is now the robot is in a constant state of like, oh, I'm just preparing to fire. So I'm in max flywheel speed, and we have one switch that's doing our normal fire, and we have one switch that's doing our self-righting flip, right? And so whenever I would release the self-righting flip, due to the mixing in the controller, it would do a full power fire. And so this is why you're seeing these crazy high self-righting flips, is because we're just launching ourselves full power, you know, as high as we can go just to try to get back over with no recourse there. Now hindsight's 2020. So if we had kind of understood what that mixing was during the match, we could have probably been more controllable and more kind of, you see Blip firing a number of times kind of randomly, and that was just due to not understanding when the flipper was firing, right? Releasing a button versus holding a button down. These are toggle switches with springs, so they're just kind of, whenever my finger lets go of them, that's when it's firing.
And
Yeah,
like,
so it was very chaotic behind the glass there.
Yeah.
As we were like, what is going on?
and some people like, I alluded in the post-match interview to having a controller problem. That was not a speed controller problem. That was a controller itself problem
Yeah.
for that issue. But I do take it as a small point of pride that level of ridiculous flippers in the box, and the first thing that broke was the off-the-shelf transmitter.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah,
So-
it's worth saying the flipper came out of that match fully undamaged. Yeah, we lost a wheel. A wheel kind of broke Loctite from us landing on it from 12 feet or whatever, what have you. So we broke ourselves a little bit there. But the flipper undamaged. The robot was undamaged other than that wheel. So we ended up just pulling that off, putting a new one on, and we were back to full fighting strength there.
Right.
Yeah, and then it was good to go through 2 fights in that same day and come out like
That's right.
ready for the future.
Yeah. Right. Just a quick solder job and you're back in the box. Right.
That's right. Yep.
Which the funny
Although-
thing is, we replaced the switches and then they broke again in test box, and then
Yeah.
we McMastered buttons and put those in, then those are harder to break.
Right. Although, I was gonna say, I do remember between this fight and the next one, somebody having a slight injury. So maybe we could tease a little bit of our next
No.
photo.
Slide 5.
Right. So we do have some other setups, right? And Brian here will go into it after our next fight. But we had some fun
So
with that.
here behind the cardboard here, you get the same view as all of our competitors did as we were kind of lining up to fight our next fight, which obviously we can't say who we're fighting. But yeah, so this is something to look forward to in a couple weeks here.
Right.
Absolutely.
It may or may not have sent Brian in the hospital. He's fine.
Let's just say it's very sharp. They're very
Blip,
sharp.
Blip has blood, sweat, and tears that went
That's
into it.
right. Yep.
So
The blood,
remember
that's
crying.
key. You gotta sacrifice a little blood to make sure you win, right? To the robot gods there.
exactly. Awesome. So we'll leave it at that photo, and then I'm going to.
This
go
is just a
through
good
some-
shout out for Zach, who loves his car, which is similar colors to Blip. So photo
It was
shoot
not
outside.
intentional either. We just kind of put them next to each other. We're like, oh my goodness. Well, that's worth a picture. And if you guys notice, there's a little blip in the license plate too, which is just the cutest.
Because he cares about his security as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm going to go into some listener questions here. And so first question we have here, I know we touched a little bit on this, but Blip can vary the power of its flipper. And was it at its full power in the Rusty fight?
I don't remember.
Was it at its full power in the Overhaul fight?
Yes. So the flipper, the RPM was the maximum that we did through the event, which was the 9,000 RPM number. There are some deviations with the flipping the bundle, as they call it, the thing that twists. There's some deviations in that between matches. We try different lengths, and I think we may be getting like slightly different flipping heights out of those. But in general, it's pretty much flipping at the height it flips through this season of BattleBots. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to be trying to improve that for future seasons.
And then a lot of thing there is like, how well is somebody placed on you for how high they go.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, one other thing to touch on. Anybody who's going to drive a flipper in the future, when you flip somebody, don't look at the thing you flipped. Get out of the way. Because so far at this point, I'm 2 for 2. Landing
Jake could have given us some tips on that one, right?
Right.
Like, oh, hey, you should probably not look at that thing that you just flipped. You should drive away.
Oh hey, oh crap. So
Right.
we'll call it extra durability testing.
So going into the next question, and which is just relates to this as well. So at no point, I guess, we were below our full throttle, right? And it's really just dependent on how the robots find purchase, I guess, with us.
That's a big part of it. A lot of times, the other thing is the idle speed. When we're flipping at the idle speed, the robots don't go nearly as high. And so a lot of times, in this fight and maybe in future fights, you'll see instances where you're like, why isn't Blip flipping right now? What's going on? And it's because we're actually waiting for the flywheel to get up to a higher speed, right? So we kind of wait as long as possible before we flip to make sure we're getting as much energy into them as possible.
And then the other part there is like, it has to start from a lower point because I would like to drive and not do wheelies.
Absolutely. It turns out
Right.
that getting underneath the opponent is more important, right? You gotta, that's step one before you can flip them. So
Right.
Yeah.
The next question, how do you plan on getting purchase with your flipper under low bots? So I'm assuming similar to like Hydras or any other the ground scraping robots. So I
Yeah,
noticed
so
a lot of
we
people.
we had a whole lot of back and forths on the design side for where to put the tip of the flipper, and everybody like spinners usually end up taking out flippers, and we just looked at the field and went super heavy field of flippers, and okay, if we put the flipper arm up behind the armor hoop, we can optimize the front end for getting underneath the opponent, isolate the super expensive complicated weapon thing from direct hits, and also if you look at Tantrum last year, while not being designed for it, we got every single opponent on top of us as a hat like at least 4 times. So knowing that, it was like, okay, we're going to optimize this robot for a field of spinners, and that means getting underneath them, and then yes, it might drop your flip count a bit, but we're going to win the match still.
that's right. Yeah. I mean, this is actually, I think, a really interesting topic we could talk about for a long time, but I think as drivetrains, robotics has advanced a lot since a lot of the BattleBot kind of tribal knowledge began. And I think one of the most critical things is, number one, the drivetrain power is immense, right? And that means that if you get them under you even just a little, you now have the drivetrain power to drive fully underneath them. And so that really means that the first, 64th of an inch is really the critical thing. It's not so much, we're really not that concerned about getting them 6 inches up on top of us in most cases.
Yeah, we're concerned about that first
tiny bit. And so making that not the flipper tip allows us to stay competitive with the rest of BattleBots as wedge tech evolves, right? We have that full front edge available to do whatever we want, and try to be the most competitive we can be.
Right. Awesome. Going back a little bit to the flywheel, what's the speed of our flywheel? I know we said it earlier, but then also, do you still have to follow the same rules for spinners?
There are some select rules we don't need to follow because it's not exposed. Yeah, Aren can speak to that.
The flywheel at 9,000 RPM also doesn't, it's only a 6-inch diameter flywheel. So we don't go above what would be a tip speed limit anyway, just from how much energy needs to be stored. Because one of the other things about the flywheel flipper setup versus a traditional vertical spinner is it's a lot more efficient in energy transfer from launching people. So in a full tilt, like if we crank it to 11, literally 11,000 RPM, the flywheel in there is like 23 kilojoules, which is more than Tantrum, but less than Hypershock and Crew. So it's as far as how much energy can be in there. But yeah, the other fun one we get to, due to how the rules are written, we can have the flywheel spin up before the match. But when you want to drive around nice, that doesn't really help that much.
Right.
That's right.
Why doesn't Blip have arms? That's a good question, considering we had some difficulty at self-writing.
I don't know. I think it was just an aesthetic choice. Right.
Oh, it wasn't just
also the side effect. We don't need a self-rider when there's a thing on the front that's a self-rider for firing.
Right.
And that's
there was a point during the design process when we had a self-rider kind of sketched in there, and we were like, we cannot do this. We cannot bring a flipper. That's only purpose is to flip robots and not be able to flip ourselves.
It was definitely a confidence thing. As far as if we're not confident enough in this flipper to get us back upright, what are we doing bringing it to BattleBots? Take the arms out, even though they're adorable.
Yep.
Right. How thick is the armor band compared to Tantrum on Blip?
It's actually thicker. Yeah.
Depending which one.
Depending on which one.
Depending on which one, of course.
What about the one that we have seen so far?
The thickest Blip armor, which is what you're seeing, is thicker than the thickest Tantrum armor by, is it a 16th of an inch?
That's a 16th. Well, Tantrum has some 3/8 thick hoops as well.
Yeah, that is true. Our old legacy stuff on Tantrum is
the taller ones you'll see are 5/16 thick.
So the real innovation on the hoop from Blip, going from Tantrum to Blip, is actually more along the lines of the shock mounting setup and how easy it is to assemble onto the robot. So Tantrum is, if you have to get that hoop on enough, there are some people on our team that they're like, they nope right out because it is so annoying, right? It's so difficult.
It is very difficult. So
we spent a lot of effort rather than trying to make the armor stronger, which, you know, we really don't feel like we've had a lot of trouble on that side of things. We wanted to make it more accessible, to make the rest of the robot easier to work on. And so, you know, maybe down the road here, we'll show some pictures of that in a future video. But it's pretty cool. We're real thrilled about that part.
yes, I don't know. I don't know about everybody, right? Because we over in Tantrum Land had to watch you guys put your armor on and off in like, 3 minutes, and it took us like 10 minutes minimum.
Right.
Right.
More than 10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. So
So,
yeah, that may be in Tantrum's future here.
Right. All right. We are designing, new Tantrum, and so it's
Yeah.
exciting to see what we're putting in from what we learned from Blip, as well as all that. So, and then our final listener question today from the famous Mike Gelately is, why is Blip so cool? Huh?
Aaron, you got this?
It takes all the inconvenience of a vertical spinner and puts a whole lot more complexity between it and launching somebody, so you get gyro and not a lot of damage, but
Right.
sweet flips. Robots flying through there is definitely the coolest part.
Yeah.
That is
I
very
maybe,
cool.
I may be a kind of a different spin on that question. As far as like, I think our robots, they don't stand out from the pack other than the fact that they have the eyes. I really feel like our decision to add the cosmetic eyes add a lot of personality to the robots and make them more, I don't know, approachable, I guess, to the audience. I don't know if you guys would agree with that.
And yeah, well, that one was fun. Like before the Rusty fight, saw people online going, "Why would they put two fan favorites against each other?" I'm like, you haven't even seen Blip fight yet. So the fact that you think it's adorable enough that
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
and let me tell you guys, oh my gosh, there was so much discussion about the eyes. Like you would not believe, trying to get people to agree on eyes. It is very tough.
You got to get it right. You got to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we did a great
I think
job.
we
of
hit
that.
a good bounce. Yep,
So,
absolutely. Cool
Yeah.
stuff.
Shout out to Christine.
Right.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I guess the closing thoughts here, I'd like to mention that we do have our shop. So we still have some awesome gear that you can go and support us on. And then we also have launched some items on our eBay. And so both of those links will be down below. But we really appreciate you guys listening. I mean, it's always interesting to get a little bit of a behind the scenes video and fill more in on what happened, right? Like who would have guessed that the toggle switch on a controller is what caused such a chaotic match from us. And so yeah, but again, thank you everybody for listening, and hope to see you next time. Got another couple fights coming soon.
Yeah, then you can follow us on seems.reasonable in most places. Then the website's seemsreasonable.com/shop or seemsreasonable. I think seemsreasonable.shop.
Right, and everything is down below. So
yeah, then follow that. And then also thanks a ton to our sponsors. Stuff like Blip can't happen with just us. So Johnson MedTech, EDE made so many of the parts for Blip. There's some very expensive parts in there.
There were a lot of people, that came by our pit that were, they were saying like, oh wow, this looks like, an industrial machine or something. And we're like, well, that doesn't happen without the sponsors, right?
Yeah. And then some of the Send Cut Send super fast turn stuff, West Coast products and all their stuff, they're like sponsors. Can't do it without them.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks again, and have a good week, everybody.